Hey guys, welcome back to another nice tutorial. Today I'll show you how to develop this downloading loader using the SwiftUI framework. The animation contains three shapes: arrow, wave fill, and tick. The fill animation starts as soon as the user initiates the download. Alright, let's start. Go ahead and create a new app. Name it circular download button and make sure that the interface is set to SwiftUI. Now I'll restructure the files by adding multiple groups. It's a good practice to set up your project structure in such a way that it's easy for you and your fellow developers to work on. If you follow a different setup, feel free to skip this part. I've set hotkeys using Xcode preferences to add existing files to a group or create new ones. Let's refactor the content view and rename it to main view. We'll also change the name of the previews. Let's add these two in a group called resources and move it inside the iOS group. Now we also need to update the paths by going to the build settings and selecting development assets and adding in iOS and resources. Now let's add a few more groups. Let's add controllers inside common. Add two more groups, extensions and utils. We'll keep all the code that can be shared across the features here. Let's also sort the groups by name. Now select extensions and add two files, color extension and foundation extension. Now select utils and add a file called colors. Add this code snippet here. We are converting the UI colors label and background to color format. We also need to import SwiftUI. Now coming back to the color extension, we'll add an initializer to convert the hex string to color. Now let's extend double and add a function that converts the double value to string and also takes care of floating points. With that, the setup is complete. Let's move over to the main view. Let's add some annotations and remove the code inside the body. We'll add a geometry reader and a Z stack. We'll come back to this later. Let's first create the three support shapes required for the animation. Let's add a new group called support views. If you remember, the animation takes three shapes: tick mark, wave fill, and the arrow. Let's start with the arrow first. Select the support group, add a new SwiftUI view, and name it as arrow shape. We'll remove the view protocol and confirm to shape instead. We'll also remove the body. Shape protocol allows us to render custom paths. We'll implement the path function required by the protocol, and whatever path points you provide here are then rendered. CX and CY tells us about the center points of the available frame, and we'll use this to move and add the required paths. Path creation involves the movement of the point cursor across the canvas and then the use of a drawing function to add lines, curves, etc. Now let's add some variables that we'll need to animate the arrow shape. I'll explain what these do at the end. Before we move further, let's fix the previews. Since line width is a let constant, we'll need to provide a default value. Shapes usually are filled end to end, and to see the actual paths, we'll need to use the stroke modifier. We'll set the line width to 4. Here, take note of the animatable pair. With this type, we can animate and update two variables as and when needed with the help of property observers. In the getter, we'll just return the pair, and in the setter, we'll assign new values for animatable X and the line difference. Now we can add the required drawing points to make the arrow shape. I'll cover the path-based drawing in the future. For now, you can follow along and add these lines of code. Notice the use of variables in the path functions. That is how we animate a shape. The preview here is a much needed helping hand. You get instant feedback and it helps to understand what a particular move or add line function is doing to the shape. There are multiple ways to draw the same path. The order and the movement decides how the animation will progress. Let's add the final add line function to create the right side of the arrowhead. The line joins of the paths are looking rough. Let's add the line cap and the line join properties to our stroke modifier to fix it. Now let's verify the implementation of the variables. The line property shrinks the main line. Now we also need to reduce the width of the arrowheads, and for that we'll be using the animatable X property. Alright, it's working as expected. Reset it back to 0 and we are done with the arrow shape. Next, let's work on the wave fill. This shape is made up of curves and we'll use 2 of them in our animation. Add a new file and name it wave fill. We'll follow the same steps as before. Confirm to the shape protocol and add the path function. We need one property for the curve and 2 more for the height and length. We'll use this in the path function to draw the sine wave. Alright, let's move on to the path function. We'll use the move function to set the pointer to the rectangle's width and the height multiplied by 2. Let's pass the values for the properties in the preview. With this one, we do not want to use the stroke modifier. We'll add a color using the fill modifier and we'll also set the frame. We'll also use the offset modifier to move the view down. Now we'll add the baseline of the shape with the help of the addLine function. Now let's use the stride function to iterate over the frame's width. You can use a for loop instead, but then you'll have to convert the value of I to CZ float to use within the drawing functions. So stride makes it easier to use. Let's use the addLine function inside the stride and we'll make use of the sine function to draw the curve. We'll also use the pi and the other above variables to create the dip. We need to do multiple computations and I got the required results with hidden trials. The wave fill is now ready and we just need to update the curve variable. Now we'll create the tick shape, follow the same process as before, create a new file and confirm it to the shape protocol. Let's add a mark annotation for the variable, and this shape only requires a single property called scale factor. Implement the path function and add the center X and center Y. Let's set the scale factor to 1, and as this shape requires the paths, we'll use the stroke modifier. We'll mostly use the move and the addLine functions to draw the tick. I would suggest you guys to play around with the shape drawings to get good. We'll make use of 2 addLine functions to draw the tick shape. Let's change the value of the scale factor to verify that our computations are correct. Alright, it's working. For actually performing the animations, we need to maintain the download state. Let's create an enum for the same. Add a new subgroup called models and we'll create a new file called download state. Simple enough, it consists of 3 states, not initiated, downloading and downloaded. Alright, now the only thing left to do is to complete the main view. Let's dive into it. First of all, let's add the required properties to animate the 3 shapes and the circle fills. Let me finish adding the properties and then I'll explain. Here, notice that we are attaching edited state property wrappers to each of our variables because we want the UI to update whenever any of these values are changed. Okay, for the arrow shape, we have arrow height for width and height, animatable X, Y offset and line difference for the animation, and then we have arrow end to animate the initial load when the view appears. For the wave fill, we have fill offset to fill the circle with the waves, and the time variable will be passed as a parameter to the wave fill. We'll use the circle trim property to animate the two semicircles. Animation duration and the fill color property are straightforward. Alright, let's create the UI now. Let's add a background color to our Z stack and we'll use the ignoring safe area modifier to ignore the edges. Let's add another Z stack and we'll use it to contain the two wave fills. Use the wave fill shape and pass these values to it. Next, let's set up the color using the fill modifier. Next, let's set the Y offset using the offset modifier. Inside the modifier, we'll have a ternary operation which will help us decide whether to pass the negative or the positive offset depending on the download state. Next, we'll add the second wave fill and pass these modified values. We'll slightly modify the fill and the offset for the second wave fill so that both of them are distinguishable. Next, we'll use the animation modifier to animate the fills. We'll use a linear curve and it will trigger on download state change. Let's also clip the overflow by applying the mask modifier to the Z stack. Next, let's set the frame for the outer Z stack and set the width to 50% of the available space. We'll also use the offset modifier to shift the view slightly upwards. Moving on, let's create the outer circle that the two semicircles fill. We'll use the stroke and the fill modifier. The loader looks a bit small, let's increase the frame by 10%. We'll set the outer circle's opacity to 85%. Next, let's add the arrow shape inside another Z stack and pass these values to it. We'll use the trim modifier to animate the initial loading of the app. And we'll use the stroke modifier to convert the arrow into a path. Now we'll use the offset modifier to set the y-axis of the arrow. Lastly, we'll apply animation using the animation modifier and use the ease out timing curve. Next, we'll add the two semicircles, create one more Z stack and add the circle inside it. We'll again use the trim modifier followed by the stroke to achieve the animation. The values passed within the trim modifier shortens the shape, and stroke modifier is nothing new, we just passed the line width, cap and join property. Now we'll use the rotation modifier and pass minus 90 degrees to it, so that the animation starts from the bottom. We'll also use the rotation 3D modifier to flip the circle along the x-axis. Set the value of x to 1, y and z to 0 and remove the other properties. Now let's add the second semicircle. We'll use the same trim and stroke property as above. And this time we'll set the rotation modifier to 90 degrees. We won't use the rotation 3D modifier because we want one circle to start filling from the left and the other from the right side. Next, we'll add the download percentage using text. Use the clean function to convert a double to a string. We'll use the font modifier to set the font. We'll set the foreground color and use the frame modifier to add a minimum width to avoid text fluctuation. We'll use the opacity modifier to hide the text until the downloading starts. And we'll use the animation modifier to animate the opacity. Next, we'll add the retry button. Let's have a look. We need to show the retry button once the download state changes to downloaded. Add an overlay and set the alignment to top trailing to start from the top left side. Now let's add a button. And inside the label we'll have an image which takes an SF symbol. Set the size of the symbol using the font modifier. We'll also use the button style modifier and pass plane to it. Now we'll use the opacity and the animation modifier to animate the retry button. We only want to show the retry button when the download state is set to downloaded. Let's use the ease in out timing curve for this animation. Now that the UI is almost ready, we'll write functions to update the value of the various state properties to achieve the animation. We'll add a function called initiateDownload. The purpose of this function is to animate the initial arrow by an upward shift followed by its merge into the bottom circle. We'll make use of the with animation block to explicitly change the values of each state variables. Following the width reduction of the arrowheads, now we'll use one more with animation block with a delay to reduce the height of the arrow. Now we'll add the last with animation block with a delay of 0.45 to completely flatten the arrowheads. Now we'll add a timer block. This will start the actual animation once the arrow has been animated. Call the animate function here and we'll define it now. Inside the animate function, set the animation duration to 4 and set the download state to downloading. Let's make use of the with animation block, pass in a linear curve and set the circle trim to animate the two semicircles. Next we'll add a timer to increase the download percentage in increments of 1 until we reach 100. Once it's 100, we'll change the download state and invalidate the timer. Now let's add the last timer that is needed to animate the curve of the wave fill when the downloading starts. We'll add a guard statement to verify that the animation is running and invalidate the timer in the else block. Use a with animation block with a default curve and increment the timer by 0.05 each time. Now let's add the onAppear modifier and here we'll animate the initial arrow. We'll need two with animation blocks. In the first one we'll update the Y offset and in the second one we'll update the arrow end. Next we'll add the tap gesture modifier to start the animation. Add a guard statement to validate that the download state is not initiated. Now coming to the last component of the UI, we'll now add the text shape. Nothing new here, we'll just use the trim modifier and set it up so that it activates once the download state is set to downloaded. And then we'll use the stroke, offset and the animation modifier just like the rest of them. Alright, let's see if everything is in place. Oh wait, the offset for the arrow is wrong. It should be arrow Y offset. There's only one thing left to do and now we just need to add the initiate download function inside the tap gesture. Now that that's done, let's run the animation and see if everything is working as expected. Awesome, well done guys. Although it's not over yet, we just need to write one last function to reset the properties and the animation. Add a function named reset and inside it we'll reset the values of all the state variables. Set the animation duration and download percentage to 0. Set the semicircle trim, time and download state to the initial values. Reset the fill offset. And the arrow state variables. Let's see if it works now. Oh lol. I think I forgot to add the reset action inside the button. Yep. Okay, it's time for the final preview. And yeah, we're done. It's time to run the app in the device and see how it looks. Pretty good. That's the end of the tutorial, guys. I hope you learned something new. SwiftUI is amazing and you can use it to build anything that you want. If you're new, consider subscribing. It will help and motivate me to publish more videos. Do leave a like and you can leave your thoughts or suggestions for the upcoming tutorials in the comments below. Until next time, bye.